What's going on, people? Welcome back to another episode of the FF Ballbusters podcast. My name is Will. Joining me is our co-host Eric, and today we're going to talk about some post-hype sleeper wide receivers, some guys who we feel like were overdrafted last year, who we feel like the prices come down quite a bit on this year, and they've actually flipped to the other side of the spectrum. But with that being said, Eric, how are you feeling today, dog?
I'm feeling good this morning. Pretty excited about this video. I think there's probably some controversial takes in here, but also lots and lots of good information. And maybe we can change some opinions on these guys because I do think they're getting too much hate right now. But before we get into the meat of the video, just real quickly, I want to talk about our subscriber goal. We are really closing in. I think we're only a couple subscribers away from 400 right now. Goal is to get to 500 before the season starts. We would really, really appreciate some help from you guys to do that. It means so much to us, helps out the channel tremendously. It's free to do, it's easy to do from your guys' end. So if you guys enjoy the content, we can be your one-stop shop for all things fantasy. Obviously, we're doing post-type sleepers today, but we got positional rankings and tiers videos out. We got round-by-round draft strategy coming out soon. We got like training camp updates and all sorts of stuff to get you prepared for your upcoming draft season. So stick with us, subscribe to the channel, and we can help you out as we get closer to the fantasy season.
Absolutely. And without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get into this list, starting it off with Mr. Gabe Davis of the Buffalo Bills. Last year being drafted as the wide receiver 27, 65th overall. This year he's going as the wide receiver 41 at 100 overall. So most of the reason he was getting hyped last year is because of the situation. He's in Buffalo, high-powered offense. Things were looking great. And he was tied to Josh Allen as the clear wide receiver 2. The thing is, that hasn't changed this offseason. The only addition they've made to the offense is Dalton Kincaid, who is still a rookie and is going to have to earn that trust of, the vets that are on the team and just the coaching staff, stuff like that. But there's plenty of passing volume still left to go around in Buffalo, even with Dalton Kincaid and Stephon Diggs there. So the reason we're fading Gabe Davis last year is because we didn't believe he was a good enough separator himself as a player to earn consistent volume. And we thought his efficiency from 2021 was unsustainable. And, that kind of did prove to be true. But at the same time, he didn't really get to prove us wrong because he was injured last year as well. He did play with the ankle sprain for a majority of, last season, playing hurt, playing hampered. And that did hamper him for quite a bit. So with that being said, he finished outside of the wide receiver 2 range last year. But with the upside case people were making for him last year, it's still there in 2023. It's just that we're taking him at a way cheaper price, which kind of brings us back into liking guys like Gabe Davis. And he's going out around a lot of other wide receiver 2s who don't possess that same ceiling in a high-powered offense. Guys like George Pickens, guys like Treylon Burks, Jahan Dotson, Kadarius Toney as well, guy who has injury issues. Of course, he's in a high-powered offense, but can't really stay on the field. So you can kind of rely on a guy like Gabe Davis a little bit more than Kadarius Toney. But we're not saying you have to draft Davis before those guys, just that we'd rather pass on them and take Davis later at a discount. We've come kind of full circle, and I'm in on Gabe Davis this year. Last year, the price was too steep. This year, I think it's just right. But what do you think, Eric?
Yeah, I'm in full agreement here. This is a guy that I think both of us were hating on last offseason, and the price was just too high. I don't know that my opinion on the player has changed much. I'm still a little bit concerned that he's not a great separator, that he's not the best route runner. But like you said, the situation for him is the same. He's the wide receiver 2 in a high-powered offense. And if he does stay healthy and he's not dealing with a grade 3 high ankle sprain from, week 2 on for the entire season, I think he has a really high upside. And we've seen, the explosive games that he's had in the playoffs. We've seen a few of those pop off in the regular season as well. So especially in best ball leagues, I really like Gabe Davis. But even in managed leagues, especially like deeper rosters, starting through wide receivers, lots of flex spots where, the guys in there aren't going to produce consistently for you anyway, I would love to have him on my team and just wait for him to pop off in one of those spots.
Absolutely.
All right, so Gabe Davis being the first guy on the list. The next guy that we have on here is Deontay Johnson. Last year, he was being drafted all the way up at the wide receiver 18, 48th overall. In 2023, his current ADP is wide receiver 34, 81st overall. In my opinion, this is one of the more obvious cases of guys who will outperform their ADP this year. Johnson is clearly an elite target earner. He saw the 6th most targets in the NFL last year, but the only 2 problems were the guys throwing him the ball were bad, and I mean really bad. And he also had terrible touchdown luck, not scoring a single time. Mitchell Trubisky and Kenny Pickett combined to throw only 11 touchdowns for the entire season and provided Deontay Johnson with a QB rating per target of 58.8, which was 100th in the league. So just awful, abysmal. And then that, along with 875 unrealized air yards, which was the second highest mark in the entire league, led to a massive differential in Johnson's actual points per game versus his expected points per game. He finished as the wide receiver 39 in points per game in PPR scoring, but his expected points per game would have had him finish a full 20 spots higher than that. He also received a team-high 18 red zone targets, which was good for 10th most in the league, but was unable to convert a single one. Prior to this year, DJ had never finished with less than 5 touchdowns, so I really don't feel like there's a way that number doesn't correct itself, even if the quarterback play doesn't improve that much. But all of the reports that we've been hearing out of camp so far have been saying that Kenny Pickett looks substantially better than he did last year. The offensive line is also projected to be significantly better, and so I'm just hoping that means a more effective and efficient offense this year in Pittsburgh than what we saw last year, and in turn, that should mean a fairly big bounce back for Deontay.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think Deontay Johnson, one of the most targeted receivers in the league, and just the fact that like last year he hit a record last year. It was most targets without a single touchdown. So I don't expect that to, continue again. I don't expect that to repeat, like you said. I just expect, Kenny Pickett to hopefully take a step up. And if he does even take a little bit of a step up and can help Deontay Johnson realize at least even a portion of the points that he's supposed to get off of all of these targets, I feel like he's a great value to find in drafts.
Absolutely.
And the next player we have up here, we have Mr. Mike Williams of the LA Chargers. In 2022, he's being drafted as the wide receiver 15, 39th overall. And 2023, he's being drafted as the wide receiver 26th, 70th overall. So last year, he finished as the wide receiver 22 in points per game, despite the offensive struggles and, the steep drop-off in ADOT from Justin Herbert, which disproportionately affected him and the rest of the receivers because he is predominantly a downfield contested catch receiver. He's not really a possession receiver, and that led him to having the lowest yards per reception of his career because, as you guys know, they were not pushing the ball down the field at all. Their ADOT was extremely low compared to other teams, especially other elite offenses. But even in a down season, he still outproduced people like Brandon Ayuk, Chris Olave, Deebo Samuel, and DK Metcalf on a points per game basis. All these guys are going significantly ahead of him in ADP this year, and I'm not saying you should draft Mike Will ahead of them, but that gap is just too large in where they're being drafted, where Mike Williams is being drafted, and the value that you're getting between the two is too similar for you to really want to take those guys above a Mike Williams. This year, Justin Herbert in the offensive line should be healthy again. Kellen Moore's entering in at OC, and that's likely going to bring a much more aggressive downfield attack. And Mike Williams is one of, if not the best, deep ball contested catch receivers in the NFL. We've seen it time and time again. He kind of gets hurt doing it a lot too, but he's really good at it. I understand the Chargers brought in Quentin Johnston, who both of us like a lot. But it typically takes a little while before we see rookie receivers, command significant volume. And even if or when he does that, there should still be plenty to go around in LA. To be completely transparent, his current price of wide receiver 26 is about where we have him ranked, so we don't really think he's underrated, but if this offense hits anywhere near it's supposed to, he could easily finish above that. Easily.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, we don't think he's necessarily super underrated, but the upside is there, and I think it's probably significantly higher than some of the guys that are going ahead of him currently. I think... I got burned personally on Mike Williams. I took him very high last year. And so I'm feeling that same sort of pain and the sting of what he did to me previously. But I'm willing to buy back in. I think that the offensive environment is going to be much different this year, assuming guys stay healthy. That's probably the biggest factor here. But I do think that the downfield passing attack that you mentioned with Kellen Moore coming in at offensive coordinator is going to make a huge difference. And I think it's going to make the biggest difference for Mike Williams. It's going to open up the field for everyone, and I think it's going to benefit. But really, this is where Mike Williams thrives, is in that downfield contested catch role.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. The next guy up on this list is going to be Brandon Cooks. In 2022, he was being drafted as the wide receiver 23 and the 61st player off the board overall. And this year, he's being drafted all the way down at wide receiver 39, 97th overall. So I understand that Cooks is going from a situation where he was the wide receiver 1 in Houston to Dallas, where he's no longer the focal point of the offense. And if that's the reason that you want to knock him down the rankings a little bit, I can understand that. That makes sense. But he was catching passes from Davis Mills on a Houston team that finished second to last in total offense. And now he gets to go catch passes from Dak Prescott with the Cowboys, who last year were in the top 10 in total offense. So even if he is the wide receiver 2 there, I don't really see that being much of a downgrade, if any at all. I've also seen some people argue that he's getting old or losing a step, might be washed. I just disagree completely. While he did deal with some injuries and some, disputes with the team, contract situation, he was unhappy clearly. And those things did limit the stats that you see in his box scores. According to Matt Harmon's reception perception, he had one of the best seasons of his career in terms of individual performance. He actually posted a success rate over 70% against man, zone, and press coverage all the way across the board. He was incredibly successful. And as much as I don't want to buy into training camp hype, all the reports that we've seen so far throughout the offseason out of Dallas have been glowing when it comes to Brandon Cooks. So it makes sense that he's not going as the wide receiver 23 again this season, but I think being all the way down at wide receiver 39 is just taking it too far.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I also think the fact, Dalton Schultz isn't there anymore either. A lot of those targets. I know we don't really like the whole vacated targets argument, but it is still a thing. The fact that Dalton Schultz isn't there, and he was someone who was kind of heavily targeted in this offense, heavily featured, losing him but gaining a Brandon Cooks. I feel like, every year except for like the last two, or I know there's 2 seasons of Brandon Cook's career where he hasn't been a wide receiver 2 in fantasy, but that's out of 9 years, and he's only turning 30. So to say he's taking a huge step back, I don't think so. Like you said, I think he's going to return to form. And honestly, man, anybody being in Houston can knock you down a couple pegs. You know what I mean? So I'm trying not to hold that against him too much.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you bring up a good point with Dalton Schultz leaving. Not only is he gone, but they didn't really they drafted Luke Schoonmaker, and he's already dealing with injuries and looks like he's probably not going to be ready to start the season. They have Jake Ferguson, who, could be a decent fantasy late round flyer, but I don't expect him to be a focal point of the offense by any means. So yeah, Brandon Cooks is stepping into a decent sized role there in Dallas.
Absolutely. And then taking a look at our next on the list, Mr. Elijah Moore. In 2022, being drafted as the wide receiver 36, 91st overall. In 2023, he's now being drafted as the wide receiver 46, 108th overall. So to just give it some context, Elijah Moore, he had just about as bad of a sophomore season as you can get, but there's some context needed to kind of see why that happened. So the team moved him from his original role in the slot early in the season. They moved him outside and deployed him as sort of a more vertical field stretcher instead of his traditional slot role. And from weeks 1 to 6, Moore played 79.8% of his snaps out wide. He carried a depth to target of 15.0 yards downfield. That was 7th in the league over that span. However, 20.7% of the targets that were thrown his way were deemed inaccurate over that span as well.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's nuts. So by the time the season ended, Moore was targeted on 13.1% of his routes and averaged 0.9 yards per route run. So with his move back to the slot and playing with the quarterback that we're pretty sure is better than Zach Wilson, Mike White, or Joe Flacco, we're pretty optimistic that Elijah Moore can take a step up, or even to return back to that form that he had his rookie season and just get that opportunity. Because last year, it was really an argument of he was disgruntled with the team because he felt like he wasn't getting the opportunities he deserved. He wasn't getting the looks he deserved. And to be fair, in terms of his play style, I'd say he was kind of correct in that. And they just did not use him correctly. Obviously, they've been struggling at the quarterback position at the Jets up until, I guess, maybe recently. We won't know until this season. But... But I do think, Elijah Moore being paired up with Amari Cooper, having Deshaun Watson at quarterback over in Cleveland, I think that should mean anything good for him, and he should outperform his ADP, in my opinion.
Yeah, I completely agree. Really excited to see what he can do in Cleveland this year with the change of scenery. Another guy that I checked Matt Harmon's reception perception for, he actually compared him, not necessarily stylistically, but compared him to Brandon Ayuk, because Matt Harmon had kind of an equal obsession with Brandon Ayuk and Elijah Moore, and both are going through kind of a similar career arc where they have a breakout rookie season, look fantastic, all the numbers are great. Second year, kind of end up in the doghouse, like you said, disgruntled, issues with the team or the coaching staff or whatever. And then with Brandon Ayuk, at least he comes out in year 3 and performs in a big way. And so he's kind of projecting a similar trajectory for Elijah Moore in terms of actual numbers. When we're talking success rate versus man, zone, and press, he was above the 70% mark in all of them and above the 74th percentile in most of these numbers across the board. So he looked really, really good last year and even better the year before that. So I'm expecting big things for Elijah Moore coming into Cleveland. And then we can get to the last guy on the list. That's going to be Courtland Sutton. This is probably the biggest discrepancy as far as where he was drafted in 2022 versus 2023. So we're talking big underdog here, but certainly very cheap. In 2022, he was drafted as the wide receiver 17, the 45th overall player. And in 2023, he's currently being drafted as the wide receiver 44, 114th overall. Huge gap. Similar to what I talked about with Mike Williams, like I am nervous about getting burned again by anyone in this Broncos offense. It was a disaster last year. But it is certainly a much easier bet to make when, I'm drafting this guy in the 10th or 11th round as opposed to the 3rd or 4th where Sutton was going last year. I think I'm also willing to chalk up a significant portion of Denver's struggles last year to Nathaniel Hackett's inability to coach. Sean Payton called it one of the worst coaching jobs in NFL history, and I'm kind of inclined to believe him. It was a dumpster fire in 2022 for the Broncos. So this offense has nowhere to go but up. And with Sean Payton at the helm, I think they're certainly going to do that. But let's not get it confused when it comes to Courtland Sutton. It wasn't his role on the team that was an issue last year. It was the quarterback play and the overall offensive inefficiency. Sutton was the team leader in target share, snap share, air yard share, average depth of target, deep targets, and red zone targets. So he led basically across the board in most of the receiving categories. Unfortunately for him, he had a target quality rating that was 42nd in the league and a catchable target rate that was 71st in the league. That, along with the unrealized air yards and lack of touchdowns, led to him scoring significantly less actual fantasy points than what would be expected with league average quarterback play. And what I found interesting when looking into some of these stats is that Jerry Jeudy actually outperformed expectation last year. So if we see these numbers for both of these guys regress towards the mean, Sutton could be significantly underdrafted.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, especially the fact that Sean Payton's been saying, looking at Courtland Sutton out there on the field, he's looking good. He's looking like that 2019 Courtland Sutton. He's even said that he's seeing some shades of Michael Thomas in Courtland Sutton, which it's pretty big coming from him because he actually did get to coach Michael Thomas. He saw it firsthand. So to see that, to see those comparisons, to see that the offense should be taking a step up with Sean Payton at the helm, yeah, it's absolutely something to get excited about. And at this price, like you said, if there's even some sort of regression to the mean, that could end up being absolutely crazy value that you could get for Courtland Sutton in drafts. Absolutely insane.
Yeah, it's just too cheap at this point for a guy that I think, in an ascending offense could be the wide receiver 2 or even push for the wide receiver 1. And another thing that I didn't mention, the Tim Patrick injury, I think does open things up for a couple guys, but specifically Courtland Sutton. I think Tim Patrick was going to be a significant red zone threat. And so I think a lot of those targets are now going to go to Sutton and maybe Greg Dulcich.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I just think there's more opportunity than given credit for Courtland Sutton to outperform expectations this season.
Absolutely. But with that being said, that's going to wrap up our list of our post-hype sleeper wide receivers. Let us know down below if you guys agree or disagree with any of these guys, any of our takes. If there's anybody you felt like should have been on this list that we should have talked about, let us know down below because we will be checking the comments, just interacting with you guys. Make sure you guys do all that great YouTube stuff. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. That way you know when we drop all of our latest videos. Again, we're trying to get to 500 before the season starts. That's the regular season. So we still got a little bit of time, but I know we can do it. All right. And with that being said as well, check out those links in the description below, but I'm going to let Eric talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, we got some sponsors down there to talk about. We have League Winners, who we are partnered with. They just brought in a bunch of new talent when it comes to writers, video creators, content creators of all sorts. So go check them out. They're pumping out all sorts of great fantasy analysis this time of season. With that partnership, we are also partnered with Underdog Fantasy, and we've been doing tons of mock drafts over there. We've been doing best ball drafts. So if you want to follow along with us and get prepared for the fantasy season the same way that we are, use our promo code FFLW to get a 100% deposit match up to $100 over on Underdog. You can also see our Dynasty owner partnership down there. That's a really cool and kind of unique Dynasty experience if you're into something a little bit different. They have a patent on using real life NFL salaries, which I think is really cool. So if you're into that, go check that out. We also have a promo code which gets you, I believe, 20% off over at Dynasty Owner. And lastly, Do Numbers. If you want some really cool apparel and merch, they got t-shirts, hats, hoodies, all sorts of cool stuff over there. And you can use our promo code, also listed in the description below, for 15% off at checkout. And lastly, if you guys are interested in joining our community, obviously hit the comments, let us know what you got going on down there, but join the Discord as well. We have a link in the description for that. We are starting to grow that community a little bit more. We're adding new people every day, and it's been a lot of fun. We got some really kind of bright minds when it comes to Dynasty and Redraft, and everybody's helping each other out. So please be part of it. We'll answer your questions, and you can talk to the people in there as well. So that would be fantastic.
And if you happen to click that Discord link and it's expired, quick fix, go to our newest video. That will have the most updated link, and that will be able to get you into our Discord. So sorry for any inconveniences ahead of time, but we're working on it. It's a process. But with that being said,
absolutely,
if you guys made it this far into the video, as always, we love you, and we will catch you in the next one. Peace.
Peace.